we're continuing in 1 John here, and we kind of left off in the middle of verse 10 in chapter 3. And I labeled this walking in life or death, but really John in this whole book has been talking about, like walking in the right things gives you the assurance that you're walking with Christ. And walking in the wrong things should give you the signal that you're not walking with Christ and that you don't have a relationship with Christ. It's been kind of how the whole book has been built, and now John is really going to focus for a while on just our love for other people and how that can really be a huge determining factor in our assurance of whether or not we're walking with Christ. But he says in verse 10 here, he says, by this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. He says, whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God. And then he says, nor is the one who does not love his brother. He says that, if you do not love your brother, he says you shouldn't think that you're of God. He says he says it very, it's kind of like almost an emphatic statement. Like, nor is the one who does not love his brother. And it's really kind of the intro to talking about this idea of understanding how important it is that you have a love and care for the people around you, and even that he's going to pull into the opposite of this, that if you could potentially even hate someone, that would be just like the absolute devastating signal that you could see in your life. And I think, you may, hopefully you won't, but you may ask the question, like, who is my brother, right? And I think this is anybody, any and everybody, just like the Good Samaritan. Remember in the story where the man was beaten and wounded and left on the side of the road by bandits, and everybody who could just stroll by without compassion clearly had nothing to do with him. But the person who loved, Jesus says, well, there's his brother. He's the one who cares. He's the one who actually has compassion for him. And so I think in this case, it's just, what is your heart like in general? Do you, in general, have a care and compassion for the people around you? And do you have the capability to hate people around you? And where is your heart at? So John says this in verse 11. He says, this is the message that you have heard from the beginning. And he says that we should love one another. John doesn't want us to forget this point. John doesn't want us to, and I find it interesting that he keeps bringing this up, but John really does not want us to forget that it's always been this way. Nothing's changed. Like, he's like, don't forget this. He's like, this is the teaching from the start, right from the very get-go, right out of the gate. He says, this is the message we had. Do you love other people or do you not? And he's going to prove this with some Old Testament scripture in just a minute. He says this is how it's always been. This has always been a red flag or a green flag. This has always been like, do you love or don't you? This has always been an indication of our heart. This is always, he says it's always been that way. You remember in 2:7 where John said, he says, I am writing you no new commandment, brothers, but an old commandment that you've had from the beginning. And then John goes on to explain how when we come into a relationship with Jesus Christ, it's almost like a new commandment because it's so important that we love one another that he's like, it's almost like a new commandment, but he says, but it's still the old commandment that we had from the beginning. He says it's not a new commandment. And then he went on to say that whoever says he's in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. He says, listen, you're not walking in the light if you can potentially still hate your brother. And then he says, but whoever hates his brother is still in darkness and walks in darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. He says, if you are going through life with hatred towards other people, you're just a bumbling buffoon in the dark. You're in a sea of blackness where you cannot reach the bottom. You clearly don't understand where the path of light is. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to get on it. You're clearly in a state where you're blind, right? He says it's like you're blinded. You need to get a grip on the facts of the path of life if you potentially are so lost that you can live in a hatred towards people. If just like the malice and anger and hatred in your heart cannot be purified and pulled out from you, he says you need to find the path in general. He says you're very, very, very lost individual at this point. But John makes it very clear from the beginning that this was a commandment that has always been. He says this is right out of the gate and right from the get-go, and now he's going to prove this to us. He says this in verse 12 of chapter 3. He says, we should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and hated his brother. And he says, why did he hate him? He says because his own deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. He says, now, how soon was this? How soon was this in evidence of saved or not? Where did Cain fall in humanity? He was literally the first person born. Like right out the gate. John is making a proof. He's like, this is nothing new, guys. This is nothing new. And then he's like, let's look at the first 2 children ever born. Which one belonged to Satan? The one who hated. Which one belonged to Christ? The one whose deeds were righteous, right? He says, this is the thing, and he's pulling on this that this is a clear indication that you can have that if your heart is in the right place, it should be able to show us. And he says, it's not like I'm just making this up on the spur of the moment, or that I'm trying to teach you a new thing. He says, look at the first 2 people, and just take a look at Cain, and be like, how do we know he was of Satan? How did we know he belonged to him? Because he was filled with hate. He was filled with hate. Clearly that is not a Christian. Clearly that is a red flag right out of the gate. He says this is something that we can see and know. And then he says, as he kind of wrapped that up, he says, what was his reasoning for hate? He says, because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. So again, this is like, I feel like I may fail in delivering this obvious fact, but I feel like John's doing a pretty good job in delivering this fact. John is like, listen, how does the unsaved person feel? He's looking over at the saved individual and he's thinking, what a goody two-shoes. Oh, you think you're better than me, huh? You think you're like, this is the sort of feelings that belongs, like if you see this in your life, this is what we're looking for. This is red flag, right? These are the things. John's making it very, very clear to us. He was looking at his brother like, he thinks he's good. He thinks he's better. And hatred began to pour from him, that he had the capacity, that his heart was not good, and that he had the capacity to hate on some other individual who was merely trying to live righteously. And in that, he also unveils the next truth, that, if you're trying to do what's right, there's a good chance that people might hate you for it. If you're not joining into the co-workers, cursing and slander and maybe the crudeness and anything that might just like make you just great buddies with all of them, they're probably going to look at you and be like, I don't like this guy, right? That's how you fit in the world. You be like the people who would have hate and slander and things that would associate with them. But when you separate, you're not going to make a lot of friends. And he makes that clear right from the beginning with Cain and Abel. And then he says this in verse 13. He says, do not be surprised, brothers, if the world hates you. He says, this won't be a shock to you. And why again? Why again would we not be surprised if the world hates you? Because there's 2 different hearts here. There's 2 different internal mechanisms within these 2 people. One of them is a hateful, like they have not humbled themselves. It's like Christianity in general is this humbling of oneself that falls at the feet of Christ as a wicked sinner, and they're just not the sort of person who's going to be hating on the other people. But once again, the world, we shouldn't see that in the world because they do not possess this same submission to God. They don't possess the same sorrow for sin. They still have full capability of hating everyone else. And he says, this is like, in each example, we're seeing another example. He says, don't be surprised if they hate you, but also that should go hand in hand with the unsaved individual. It makes sense that would be the case, that they would not like people who are saved. And this next statement he makes in 14, he says this. He says, we know that we have passed out of death and into life because we love the brothers. That is a powerful statement right there. That is crazy. Do you think on that? Like, here you are, sentenced to death. Like, you're going through life and you're like, where am I going to spend eternity? And he says this. He says, do you want to know when you know that you've escaped dying, like you're not going down trajectory, but you're going up trajectory? Do you know when you know that this has occurred in your life? He says, you'll know when you love the brothers. Why? Because there is two hearts at play. It's not just that you can see it in them, okay? It's not just that you can look around and be like, oh, this person's not practicing and this person's not acting, but you can look internally and you can look at yourself and be like, oh, my heart that had the capability to just hate on people and was filled with this malice and anger and just envy and jealousy and, oh, they did that to me. Remember the unforgiving servant who Jesus forgave? And he says, what is wrong with you that you would not forgive your brother after I've forgiven you? Like the regenerate heart. Like he says, we can look at ourselves. Take a look inside. And he says, in this moment, when you have a new heart, because a new heart is the tenderness of the heart when salvation enters the life. He says, you'll see it in yourself. And in that moment, when you go from the ability to look around in a hateful atmosphere to the ability to look around and say, I love and care about these people. I may have found the truth, they may not have, but I will love them and I will care because these are God's children who ought to be cared about. And in that moment, you will say, oh, that's the new heart. That's salvation within me. That's Christ in me. That is, I know where I'm going and I have escaped death. What a statement. What a verse. How powerful is that? That when you look inside and you see that, you'll know it happened within me. Christ is in me, and the change in my heart has taken place, and that has been a change that has taken place within me. That I love other people. You know, if you were to tell someone that you loved them, but you took care of their children and you did not care for them, you did not love them, you took terrible care of their children, they would say, you're a liar. But yet, all people are creation of God. And if you cannot love them, you know, Jesus says, if you cannot love your brother whom you've seen, you cannot love God whom you've not seen. Like, right? Like, you must... and I think, maybe taking care of children is a bad example. I know I've taken a horrible beating since we did an internship in Ohio, and I feel like I'm probably going to break up my good flow of my message that I had here. But I was doing an internship in Ohio, and my wife's already, no, she says, no, I can't tell you. We'll move on. No, I will. No, but, so we're doing this internship in Ohio. And I'm taking the kids over to the park, and it's kind of a, like, Barberton area. It's a kind of a really nasty, like, they're like, don't go outside by yourself, don't walk out, don't never go out at dark. It's just not a good place to be, not a good community. And anyway, so I'm going to the park with my kids, and we're walking over there, and this little 4-year-old neighbor kid follows us over to the park. We're all playing at the park. Then I take my kids home, and the neighbor kid stays there. And I'm home, and all of a sudden, Claire's like, did you leave Rowan at the park by himself? And I was like, am I my brother's keeper? I was like, his parents were all upset at me. Like, it was like a dark spot on the whole trip. I was like, glad we moved. Like, it was not a good thing in the community. But I was like, I didn't know. I was like, hey, these parents just let this little 4-year-old go to the park by himself? That's crazy. I didn't realize I was watching it. But anyway, maybe don't let me watch your kids. I don't know. Watch your own kids. But anyway, if you don't care about other people, God's own children, how can you tell? I've ruined it, I feel. But if you cannot love other people, you cannot tell God that you love him. I wish I would have not told that illustration because I feel like it ruined it. But this is something that you can know that goes hand in hand with loving Christ, is loving his children and caring about them. I clearly didn't hate this child. I just thought his parents just let him go wherever he wants. I didn't know I was his caretaker. But anyway, but here John ends this verse 14 by saying, whoever does not love abides in death. Like, I don't know how much more clear he could paint this out for us. Like maybe I'll just say it really clear to you. Whoever does not love abides in death, right? We know how John has been talking about walking through this whole book. How many times does he say walk or abide, walk or abide, walk or abide? Like, there's two roads. You can walk in darkness or you can walk in light, right? And he says, whoever does not love, they're walking in death. Like, it's like the opposite of that feeling that you know that you've been converted internally. Like, if you have hatred and animosity and you don't get along with your brothers or your literal brothers or your siblings or your neighbors or your friends or I don't care who it may be. Like, you have not the heart that's been converted to Christ, that has humbled itself and drained itself to emptiness, realizing its own sin, to be able to stand up and be like, yeah, I am so unworthy of love that I can at least love other people. Like, if you don't have that, you're still walking in darkness. You're still on your way down the wrong road. You're headed the wrong way. Then John says this in verse 15. He says, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. You know, this is a very strong statement, because a lot of us would say, well, I'm not a murderer. But John says, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. And you know this. Like, I know this is extreme, but John's also making it clear, right? I mean, it's not like he's mincing words, right? He says, do you realize that anyone who is filled with hatred is a murderer? And you're like, what? Like, he's a murderer? You know? But John, like, he says, you know it. You know it if you think about it. You know, if you watch security footage from your house and you saw one of your friends, like, raise a knife up and he was going to stab you in the back, and then somebody comes in the door, oh, he puts it away. Ah, that guy, he's fine, right? He's no murderer. But yet the hatred of murder runs through his veins. The heart of evil pumps within him. He is, whether or not he's committed the act, the hatred that flows through him, John relates to being the hatred that maybe you don't even have enough hatred to actually murder someone. But John doesn't say you have to. He says the hatred is like it's the chemistry of murderous people. And it's pumping through your veins because you literally have the capacity to hate like that. And John says that's not something that should pump through the veins of a Christian. Like, he says you should know that. And I think, it's no joke. It's a very serious thing. Jesus said in Matthew 5:21, Jesus says, you have heard it said that of those of old that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to the judgment. Jesus says, you know that a murderer does not walk free. You've always known that, right? You understand it, right? But then Jesus says this. He says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to the judgment. And he says that everyone who insults his brother will be liable to the council. And he says everyone who says, you fool, will be liable to hellfire. Jesus says, listen, I don't care if you've committed the act. Everybody knows that if you committed the act, that you're not on your way to heaven. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus didn't save murderers like murderous Paul or maybe David who had Uriah killed. Or it doesn't mean that he cannot save that person. But it clearly means if you know that somebody is literally planning to kill someone, a murderer who is not repentant is definitely not a Christian, right? In that moment, they're definitely not a Christian. And Jesus, like John, who learned from Jesus, is teaching this fact that people who are capable of hate have the flow of murderous flowing through their body. Because the hatred is the sin that it's the sinful thing that makes murder come to fruition, right? So if you're capable of having the evil, Jesus says, listen, if you can go to your brother and be like, you idiot, I just can't stand it. Like, you have within you the hatred that qualifies you for having the chemistry of a murderer within them. And he says, this is not good. This is not good. Not good. This is a terrible thing. This is a terrible red flag warning to you. So here, as we're drawing this to a close here, I'm kind of ending this section in verse 16 here. And he says this, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our life for the brothers. This is how we know the purest of pure hearts, the most regenerate of regenerate Christian behavior. This is how we see good. Jesus looked at us wicked sinners who hated on him, and he said, I will love you and I will die for you. While you're sinners, I'll give my life for you, the purest love that could be poured out. And he says, if your God and example, your Christ, does this, you ought to lay down your life for the brothers. You ought to be like, I, as a wicked sinner, was forgiven by Jesus. I am not going to hold hatred and animosity towards other people. I'm not going to let it flow in my veins. I'm not going to let it come from my mouth. I'm not going to insult people from my mouth. I am going to be like, woe, unworthy me, if Jesus does that for me. That's the second time I've made up a word this 2 weeks. Does that for me. If Jesus does that for me, I ought to do the same. That should be that's the pure heart. That's the regenerate Christian. That's when you look up and you say, I'm following Jesus. I'm walking with him on the road of light, right? Because I'm walking in, what does he say? He says, anyone who does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. Like you're going to walk with him, be as him, follow after him, right? So in closing this morning, I just think, again, we could take this and we could be like, well, that's an extreme statement of John. That's an extreme statement of Jesus. I'm somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, so I'm just not going to worry about it. But I'm just going to tell you, I try to just tell it like it is and call it like I see it, right? I'm trying not to make this up, right? John gave it to us hardcore, like serious. Like maybe you say, well, I don't hate anybody enough to murder them, but do you love them? You need to realize that this is so serious that you should say, I don't want to live in the landscape of, I'm not sure if I hate them that much. You want to come over here to where you say, I love them. I love them. That is a place where you know what? Where you know that you have come to know him. Where you know that you walk with him as he walked. That's where you have assurance, right? That's where you have assurance. When you love these people, right? It's not a middle ground. It's like you've gone right through the spectrum and now you love them like Jesus would have loved them, right? That's a very that's where John lays the course. That's how you should have great assurance that you're walking with Jesus, is when you love your brothers and when you love the people around you. So let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer this morning. Our God and Father, this is a very strong message that John is giving us, one that we maybe need to digest a little bit, one that we maybe need to think, do I love like that? Do I bear hatred within myself towards other people? Do I call people fool? And do I bear grudges and animosity? And is my heart filled with the wicked things that Cain thought of? Or am I loving as Jesus loved, as he looked at sinful people and was willing to lay his life down for them? Or do I care about my brothers? Would I seek their protection? Would I worry about them? And Lord, help us to take these things and let your Spirit work in our lives, and help us to have the assurance that we know we're walking with him because we have chosen to abide in the things that are right and the things that he lives in, that we live with him in those things. And help us to put that on our lives, Lord. And I just pray this in your Son's name. Amen.